Eddie Kuluk bounced his battered Cessna 185 off the short, packed snow strip at Trout Ridge with the same shrugging confidence he used for every winter landing. 35 below, a violet dawn just beginning to leak over the sawtooths, and no one but two ravens bothered to greet him. He cut the engine, shouldered the burlap mailbag, and crunched toward the single-room post office, steam from his breath pluming like a locomotive. In 30 minutes, he would be back in the air, running the Tuesday looped Trout Ridge to Deerhook, then down the icy coast toward St. Elia Pass. But for now, he wanted coffee hot enough to burn feeling into his lips. Inside, the pot gurgled on a dented propane stove. Mark, the postmaster, still cinching his parka, waved. "Set it anywhere, Eddie. Your thermos is by the stove." Eddie dropped the bag beside a dented metal sorting desk. Letters fanned out across the table like migrating birds. Bills, seed catalogs, care packages from enlisted kids, and something unusual. Thick ivory envelopes, 7 of them, bound with a red ribbon, each one addressed in elegant fountain pen script to simply, "My dearest." No surname, no P.O. box, no village, nothing. Eddie touched the ribbon and felt a small electrical thrill. When you spent half your life at 2,000 feet over white emptiness, even tiny mysteries felt oversized. "You see these?" he asked Mark. Mark squinted. "Been showing up 3 weeks running. Whoever sorted them in Anchorage must be asleep at the switch." "Why not return to sender?" "No return address either. Just a postmark from Anchorage. Mail gods must think Trout Ridge is the end of every line." Mark shrugged. "They'll get routed back eventually. Toss 'em in the hold and fly, bush boy." Eddie slipped the letters into his jacket pocket instead. He told himself he'd hand them to the Anchorage clerk on Friday, but something about the old world handwriting, angles precise but softened, like a violin making room for silence, wouldn't let him treat them like ordinary misfires. 2 villages later, Deerhook's cafe was thick with spruce smoke and gossip. Eddie nursed reheat soup and thumbed the first envelope open. "My dearest, it has been 40 seasons of ice since I last watched you paint that cliff where sun never stayed. I have learned the cold does not vanish. It only teaches us new colors for blue. The hush of your shoulders keeps me alive." Eddie stopped, heat rushing to his ears. 40 seasons of ice, no signature. No doubt it was a love letter one that belonged in someone else's hands. He flew on, but the words stuck like frost to wing struts. By Thursday, he'd read every letter. 7 weeks of a conversation no one seemed to be hearing. Each spoke in the same voice, lyrical, yearning, but also oddly technical about the land. References to the rime that forms above the basalt tusks by Talon Bay, and the ochre light that falls on fish camps south of Surak Hot Springs. Whoever wrote them knew Alaska like a cartographer loves a secret. The letters also mention paintings, seascapes, storm sky canvases that ring purple from the throat of dawn. Eddie thought of Trout Ridge's only artist, Myra Thorne, a painter who sold moody coastal scenes to tourists come summer. Maybe she had commissioned them as some eccentric art stunt, or maybe she'd know the place names. Friday morning, Eddie landed at Trout Ridge under a lit of graphite sky. Snow hissed sideways, stinging his cheeks. Mara's studio, an old fisheries warehouse on stilts above the frozen inlet, cast warm light through frosted windows. And he found her standing barefoot on a tarpaulin, brush in hand, humming at a half-finished canvas. Mara Thorne was 30, half Yupik, half Norwegian, hair black as soot, and eyes that waited observation with a gentle, almost scientific curiosity. Eddie had delivered her tubes of ultramarine and French ochre many times. They'd shared beer at solstice bonfires, but nothing deeper. He cleared his throat at a question about geography. She smiled, dabbing woolly purple along a cloud bank. "Ask the weather service? Better ask a painter." He offered her the letters. She wiped fingers on a rag, slit one open, and read a passage silently. Something loosened in her posture. She flipped to another. By the third, she looked up with wet lashes. "These are beautiful." But do you recognize any spots he described? Talon Bay, Basalt Tusk. Balt Tusk sounds like Kuskokwim sea stacks south of Hader Point. Nobody local calls them that, though. And Sarayik is a fishing ghost town pitched into the tundra. My grandmother used to camp there for berries. Mara rested her knuckles on the table. Who wrote these? No sender. They keep showing up in the mailbag. A pen pal who forgot addresses entirely. Or someone who doesn't want to be found. Mara shook her head. Art wants witness. So does love. Eddie looked at the storm outside, at his plane icing under gusts. His next Anchorage flight had just been grounded by radio. You want to try and track him? A slow grin cracked her seriousness. Chasing a phantom poet across Alaska beats painting in the dark. Eddie's internal compass flicked. Whenever he planned anything beyond the next runway, life sucker punched him. Yet the idea of tracing these letters with Mara's keen gaze across the winter world, this felt like being invited into a story bigger than mail routes. Pack warm, he said. They spent Saturday studying maps on her studio floor. Each letter provided coordinates disguised as imagery. Where the river forks, like a swallowtail, matched a satellite photo of the Cogruck's double delta. Heat that huffs beneath seal-flat ice, hinted at geothermal vents near fog-bound springs. A breadcrumb trail emerged, meandering north and west, as though the writer were migrating between forgotten ranger cabins. Maybe he's a trapper or a biologist, Eddie proposed. Or a ghost, Mara countered. Sunday dawned -43. Eddie preheated the engine with a Herman Nelson, scraped, remmed, plexiglass, and loaded supplies. Extra abgas cans, snowshoes, 2 bedrolls, and Mara's paints. She insisted something indescribable might need recording. They followed the first clue to Cogrick Fork. The place looked uninhabited, but for Willow Ptarmigan. On a frost-skinned table inside a public-use cabin, Eddie found a coffee tin. Inside, another ivory envelope ribboned red. Mara exhaled white vapor. We're officially in a scavenger hunt. The new letter, dated only by moonphase, mentioned February's eclipse of silence and gave fresh directions. Seek me where the wind comes silver from spruce, where outwashed plains hum with buried thunder. Mara hummed. Buried thunder, that's what miners call subglacial rivers near the old copper pit by Talon Bay. Eddie tapped the envelope's corner against his palm. He's leading us, willingly. They flew again, fuel sloshing low. Wind rose, bucking the Cessna. Talon Bay's strip was snowed under, forcing Eddie to land on the frozen shoreline. Prop blasts sent shards of hoarfrost swirling like ghost fish. They unloaded and trekked toward the abandoned copper pit, outwashed plains stretching like bleached linen. Half-collapsed adits yawned along a bluff. Fireweed skeletons rattled in breeze. In one tunnel, Eddie's headlamp caught murals pigments on basalt. Furious skies, aurora swirling in improbable striations. Mara approached, fingers trembling. These are new. Whoever's writing also paints. On the far wall, another coffee tin waited. Inside, not a letter, but a graphite sketch of a woman seen from behind, hair braided with feathers, standing at a cliff's edge. Mara recognized herself instantly from a photograph taken years earlier at Eagle Bluff. Her voice thinned. He's been watching, or knows your work intimately. She removed gloves, feeling the charcoal lines. The sketch at the bottom bore initials. C.G. Eddie asked. My mother was Charlotte Jorgensen, Mara murmured. She died when I was 10. Suddenly the game snapped taut. Mara's mother had been an itinerant painter, famed for storm-ridden seascapes. She'd vanished during a solo kayak trip off Cordova. The Coast Guard later found only fragments of hull. What if he knew her? Mara whispered. They camped in the pit's wayshed, kettle rattling on a twig stove. Outside, the aurora spilled violent green tongues. Mara thumbed the sketch. My mother's journals mention a meteorologist she met at a research post near Surak. She called him the man who names clouds like lullabies. No name, but C could be Charlotte Jorgensen, not the sender. Meaning he drew your mother, gave you her initials so you'd follow. Mara stared into steaming cocoa. Or so he could find me? Eddie watched embers, uneasy. The mail had always been a tether connecting remote souls. Now it was luring them deeper, threading personal grief with cosmic coincidence. Morning, they took off northward, chasing coordinates etched in the sketch margin. Weather soured, ice raked the windshield, downdrafts shoved them. Eddie's altimeter jittered. Northeast of Surak Ridge, engine temps spiked. He put the Cessna down on a stretch of muskeg frozen like hammered iron. Ski gear hissed to a stop. Radio hissed dead. Battery maybe iced. No quick fix until daylight. We're stuck, Eddie said. Mara shivered, but her gaze drifted beyond him. Look. Half-mile away, a Quonset hut hunched against the ridge, smoke curling thinly from a tin chimney. With rifles slung, wolves roamed the tundra. They trudged across wind-carved crust. The hut's door opened before they knocked. Nelt's barefoot. You're not an old man stood framed against lamplight. Hair white, parka patched with canvas, spectacles fogged. Kindness and fatigue wove through his smile. Behind him, canvases propped against snowshoes, unfinished, wild with color. Eddie recognized the basalt tunnel skybursts. I wondered when you'd arrive, the man said. Mara's breath hitched. Are you CG? I'm Conrad Jameson. He bowed stiffly. Come in. It's colder in your bones than on the porch. Inside smelled of linseed, kerosene, and sourdough starter. A battered typewriter sat atop a crate, ribbon still inked dark. Stacks of ivory envelopes littered the floor, hundreds, perhaps. Eddie's pulse hammered. You wrote the letters. Why no address? Conrad poured them tea. His hands trembled, yet no drop spilled. Because they were for someone who no longer keeps an address among the living, he said quietly. I mailed them as prayers, trusting wind and chance might carry one to the daughter she left behind. Mara's voice cracked. You knew my mother. Charlotte was the fierce star around which my seasons revolved. When her kayak shattered, my universe lost its tide. I kept sending her words, believing the world is porous, that letters can seep through. He turned to Mara. But I also knew you existed, child of brushstroke and surf. I followed your exhibitions. I sketched you from a news photo and left the drawing so you'd come. His eyes shone. You carry her cadence, a quiet, expanded, filled only by stovepop. Mara pressed palms to her eyes. Eddie felt he'd intruded on something sacred. Conrad gestured to racks of canvases. She and I promised each other a joint show. Paintings and meteorology poems together. I've kept painting, but my words freeze, he sighed. Fragile as frost. My health fails. I wanted to pass them to someone who understands the dialogue between storm and palette. Mara touched a canvas, rolling greens, devouring sky, so like her own storms, yet gentler. They're beautiful, Conrad smiled ruefully. Not enough without her half-half. An Arctic gale howled. Eddie checked his watch. Rescue or departure tonight was impossible. He unpacked the radio guts on the table, but some part inside him recognized fixing beacons wasn't the real task now. Conrad produced another envelope, unsealed. This one I never dared send. Will you read it? Mara unfolded it, hands steady now. My dearest, if shadows could speak, they would say, I loved you beyond the equilibrium of tides. Tonight the aurora has your laugh, tumbling wild. I have learned to paint quiet so you can rest in the hush. I send these words hoping they brush the edge of your daughter's dreams, that she might someday hear why storm colors call her. Mara's tears left dark beads on the stationery. When she finished, she looked at Eddie first, as if seeking a witness outside the gravitational pull of her grief. He offered a nod. Then she crossed to Conrad and embraced him. The old man sagged, relief spilling from decades of solitude. Night deepened. They shared moose stew from a dented pot. Conrad spoke of weather stations long abandoned, of reading jet streams like sheet music. Mara explained how she mixed alizarin to mimic glacier rivers. Eddie, mostly listening, felt like mail carrier turned matchmaker between past and future. When Conrad's eyes grew heavy, Mara whispered, "You should rest." He nodded. She led him to a cot nestled among canvases. Later, Eddie found Mara outside, snow squeaking under their boots. Stars seethed overhead, breath crystallizing. She hugged herself. "I thought the trail would end in disappointment," she said. "Instead, I found family." Eddie traced a finger along the Cessna's iced wing. "And now?" "I'm taking him back to Trout Ridge. We'll curate the show he and my mother dreamed of. I'll finish her half my half now." She angled her face, wind tugging stray hair. "You've flown mail here 10 years, but today you delivered something bigger." He chuckled. "Airmail of the heart? Don't be corny." She punched his shoulder lightly. He caught her gloved hand, surprising them both. In the hush, propeller wires pinged as metal cooled. Something fragile but sturdy passed between them, like wing lift meeting thermal. By dawn, Eddie had rewired the transmitter. Weather cleared. They lashed Conrad's canvases into the cargo hold. The old man settled in co-pilot seat with blankets. As they took off, the Quonset hut shrank to a solitary dot, then vanished in blinding white. Eddie banked south. Below, the wilderness rolled, unfinished and infinite, a hymn of ridges, frozen rivers, memory, and promise braided tight. Conrad slept, smile etching rose feet deeper. Mara leaned forward, watching sunrise pour molten copper across the snow. Eddie felt the plane around him like a rib cage, wings drumming steady, as if saying, "Here, here, keep going." He'd ferry letters and groceries again next week, but something fundamental had shifted. The sky was still ruthless, the distances still measureless, yet love now mapped new runways across it. 3 weeks later, Trout Ridge's cannery warehouse bloomed into a gallery. Locals filed beneath strings of lanterns to see storm correspondent Charlotte and Conrad, completed by Mara. On one wall, Conrad's meteorological poems unfurled in calligraphy. Opposite hung Mara's fierce new canvases, echoing her mother's style but forged through her own flame. Between them, an empty frame held 7 ivory envelopes, ribboned, each now addressed to anyone who believes words can traverse ice and time. Eddie, wearing a borrowed blazer, hovered by the coffee urn. The show hummed with wonder, everyone speaking softer than usual. When Mara finished her opening remarks, she crossed the floor to Eddie. "Got something for you," she said, handing him a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. He peeled it open, a painting of his Cessna slicing above lavender cloud banks, a sliver of dawn catching aluminum. On the horizon, faint words barely legible. "Each letter needs a wing." Eddie swallowed. "It's perfect. Thought you should hang it where you plan flight paths." Her smile tipped shy. "Maybe remind you that sometimes the cargo changes lives." He leaned, pressed a kiss to her forehead, unsure when the seaside smell of her hair had become essential. "You ever need a lift to your next exhibition?" he murmured. "I know a pilot." "That so?" "Payment negotiable," she laughed, river bright, and looped her arm through his. Outside, snow began again, as gentle as turning pages. Eddie felt ready for whatever messages drifted next across Alaska's white expanse. Love letters misaddressed, hope scrawled on stationery, or just the steady heartbeat of a painter beside him, while the Cessna's wings stitched villages together beneath an unending sky.